There's consequences outside of the personal consequences. So, if I jump off a boat or I go into a cave and I do something stupid and I break all the rules and I don't survive it, yeah, okay, I'm dead. That's bad for me. That's really ruined my day. But what about all the people that I've surrounded myself with?
Off-Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. At the age of 17, Greg Hilliard kicked off his journey into the sport. Now, with more than 25 years in the industry, he has seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. Always one to speak his mind, he does not shy away from the difficult topics. In this episode, I sit down with him and hear his thoughts about progression without experience, ripple effects, mindset, Talkin Tek, Subsea Propulsions, and much more. Please enjoy. Greg, how are you doing this morning?
Oh, a little tired. I've never been a morning guy, but you got me out of bed early enough to, which I guess it's late where you are, to just sort of dive into this. So, trying to get my second cup of coffee going.
Actually, so I usually start the day with coffee. I've been actually trying to, the last few days, I've been trying to slowly. I drink a lot of coffee, so I was like, okay, let me try to change it up a little bit. So the last few days I've been kind of just incorporating some black tea, which it's been good, but I definitely still have to get a cup of coffee, and so I feel you on the coffee. But I wanted to, bring you on to the show. Thank you for coming on to the show. I appreciate it. I'm excited to have you on, hear about your story, hear more about what you have going on. And, I'll just throw it out there. First question I always like to ask is, tell me how and why you became scuba certified. Tell me about that first breath, what led up to it. How was it? Was it amazing? Was it, I absolutely hate this? Tell me all about it.
Well, so first breath's actually, I guess, a bit of a funny story or stupid story about, being young and bulletproof. So family had a little cottage in Port Franks, Ontario, which is on the Canadian shore of Lake Huron. Had a friend that lived up there. He was into snorkeling. His parents had a boat. So, of course, friend gets into snorkeling. That means I've got to get into snorkeling. So I was like 12 years old, went to the local dive shop in London and bought, basic mast fins and snorkel and kind of got into that. We did that a fair bit. And then when I was 16 or it might have been 17, both Adam and I jumped in and did a open water course in London as well. Just sort of a natural progression. But of course, you're 17 and you're bulletproof and you're dumb. So we figured the night before our open water checkout dives, we're going to be divers. Let's celebrate, right? Not the night after, but the night before. So again, being young and not knowing how to handle our alcohol, we got ourselves into a bottle of Crown Royal and doing open water checkout dives in like 3-foot swells, hung over. And it was a case where I wasn't really hung over till I got in the water for the second dive. I think we all do a few stupid things in the sport, but I kind of set off on the wrong foot. But from there, it's I survived that, got through, got my certification, and kind of made a point of taking at least one course sort of every year since. And I feel like education was important in the sport right from the get-go. But yeah, sort of did the PADI open water thing, followed that into advanced open water in Tobermory. Then I got into helping and working with some other instructors. Sort of dive mastering and dive master candidating, so helping along with courses, and did that for a couple of years. I remember being up in Tobermory on a kind of miserable cold weekend doing an advanced course with an instructor, and looking across at there's 2 moorings on this certain wreck site, and looked across and saw a guy in a Starcraft putting on. He was wearing his nice warm looking fluffy suit, and then he was getting zipped into his dry suit. I went looking at that and I go, that's what I'm missing, right? I'm trying to put on this clammy, cold, miserable wetsuit, and so it wasn't. I think that was on a Sunday, and on Monday I was in the dive shop, writing a check for my first dry suit, and then that was the key that extended my, now I could extend my dives to where the cold wasn't the limiting factor, the gas was, and then the gas wasn't you get bigger tanks or doubles or whatever, that wasn't the limiting factor, and just been sort of chasing that carrot sort of ever since.
Yeah. I definitely know the chasing the carrot all too well. I feel like it's almost never ending. So I've done just I mean, you've listened to the show, so I'm sure you know, like, I don't have a whole lot of experience in cold water, and it's definitely something that I want to change, and I'm hoping to change it. I'm actually trying to make plans for next year to incorporate some cold water dives, but I just wanted to bring it back just a tiny bit because I wanted to kind of ask, like, when you first were going into it, you're kind of like saying, like, oh, young and bulletproof, and you're going into it, and it's funny because we don't know what we don't know, right? So going into it, looking back on it, how would you have changed it, knowing what you know now, the level of safety that there needs to be? Does that question kind of make sense?
Yeah, great question, Nick. And there's I've been doing this now. I'm coming up on 25 years in the sport, nearly a quarter of a century, and I've seen a lot. And there's things I've said that nothing can replace just time in the industry. You can go out and do 300 dives your first year, second year, whatever, so many years as a diver. But if you've only been a diver for 3 years, you haven't seen very much. And there's just something to be said. It sounds like these old timers sitting on the park bench talking about, experience. But there's something about not just in water experience, but experience around the sport. I'm certain there's things I've done really well to get where I am. I've had great mentors. That's probably the best thing. Guys like Ken West, Terry Irvine, Larry Green, just to name a couple. Those have certainly imprinted on my character and my ability as a diver. But there's certainly a lot of things I've learned the hard way, and probably the last 3 years I've really looked back at my diving. I've looked at other people's diving. I've looked at accidents and near misses, and really kind of analyzed these out, probably ad nauseum, to where, okay, we need to do better. And I kind of want to hit on those, and there was some that hit a little close to home. There's some that maybe didn't, and I'm just going to kind of jump in. There's consequences outside of the personal consequences. So, if I jump off a boat or I go into a cave and I do something stupid and I break all the rules and I don't survive it, yeah, okay, I'm dead. That's bad for me. That's really ruined my day. But what about all the people that I've surrounded myself with? And that's what I want to hit on. So there's one, I'm going to name the names because people know who I'm talking about, and they want to send me hate mail. The inbox is full anyways, so I'm not too worried about it. It's kind of changed the tragedies, and Gareth does a really good job of breaking this stuff down, but he doesn't get into the emotional side of it. He's the aviation guy. It's a binary thing. Yep, you're alive or you're dead. But there's one fella from up our way. His name was Carlos. It's about a decade ago now, and what a cool guy. He kind of burst onto the scene. He did his open water checkouts like a week or two after my wife did hers, did with different instructor, kind of was in his own silo. A lot of dive shops are their own bubble. They don't let a lot of outside influence, which is sort of a sad thing, come into and change the way they do things. And they'll all dive in their little groups, and we're all diving together alone. Either as, just as teams we do that, or as shops or as an industry. So Carlos kind of burst onto the scene. It certainly seemed like he had the financial resources and the time to go out and do whatever he wanted to do. And this guy went from open water checkout to full trimix cave diver, diving every weekend and a lot of evenings. And he sort of picked up a leadership role within his shop. That's probably a bit of a mistake that they let that happen. But, if someone's in the shop and they're spending money and they're taking courses and they're doing the dives, it doesn't take long to get a bit of a following. And he was a polarizing character. You were either in the cheerleader for Carlos fan club, or you kind of saw some things that you didn't like and you kind of gave him a wide berth. Certainly, as he ventured into technical diving, there were a handful of I'm going to say influential people in the sport that would quietly, kind of under their breath or at a bar or whatever, in confidence, say, "Man, I just get a bad feeling," or really cool, he's doing all this and he's championing the sport, but he's just too aggressive. And they would say that. We'd say these things under our breath. We'd say them at dive shows, amongst our small group or our peers. But as far as I know, nobody took Carlos aside, had a fireside chat, said, man, we love what you're doing, but we want you to be around for 20 more years. And again, to my knowledge, nobody really did. Like I said, he went from open water to full cave pretty fast. And, as instructors and professionals in sport, we need this. The sport's fueled by money. So if you're writing checks, there's instructors who are happy to take your money and teach you courses and try to influence you a little bit. And ultimately, if you have a cert card, I guess you're qualified to do the dive. So, like I said, Carlos built a pretty core group around, actually a very active group. The dive shop he was diving out of was certifying a lot of students, selling a lot of gear. Like, they were on the upward slope. They had a lot of positive things, great things going on out of that shop. Again, some stuff I wasn't fussy about, but financially the shop was doing well. Students were rocking out of there. People come into the sport through that shop, and they would see Carlos and his core group, be like, that's where I want to be. That's what I want to be doing. And like I said, kind of it happened so fast. I don't know that he earned that position, but he got there. I did go for a dive with Carlos. He was a great diver, good trim, good buoyancy control. So the mechanics were great. I only did one dive with him. There was a personality thing. I don't have the most, I have about a 40 grit sandpaper personality, and I feel like his and I's didn't particularly mesh, and so we didn't dive together much after that. There was a few other issues, but anyways, I don't want to attack Carlos's character, because a lot of people really loved him, and there's certainly some things I've said in the past that I wish I could have back, but I want to come back to what he meant to the sport, meant to all of his friends and his peers. He had a wife and a 7 or 8 year old daughter. He's a very active diver. He went on an Andrea Doria trip in the summer. I want to say it was the summer of 2013. I might have my dates wrong. Like most ocean trips, it's the weather just kicks your ass, and you're lucky to get more than maybe 1 or 2 dives in. So he came back from his trip with full tanks or a bunch of full tanks. Got home, turned and burned. He had an at-home fill station, or actually a storage container at his shop or his yard, where he had a compressor and fill panel, and was doing trimix and nitrox fills for him and his group. So he kind of came back with some chaotic gear, right? You're expecting to come back with empty tanks, you don't, and it was kind of a turn and burn where basically you had a day turnaround time, and then he was off to Florida to go cave diving. And Carlos was able to build relationships with a few people down in cave country, and one of them was Rich Courtney, and Rich had a dive shop at the time, was a pretty active instructor, genuine cool guy. I actually kind of talked to Rich. I said, why are you hanging out with this dude? No, I don't like him, right? But just because I don't like one of your friends doesn't mean we can't be friends, and just because your friends don't like me doesn't mean we can't be friends. We might not all be able to hang out and go for dinner, but I'm not going to say, hey, if you're diving with him, I'm not diving with you. But anyways, Rich saw all the positives in Carlos and very few of the negatives, and that's fine. So anyways, Carlos was down in Florida. Richard's daughter was about the same age as Carlos's daughter, so they would hang out together. It very quickly became almost, like a very tight friendship, if not almost family. Carlos had a few buddies down there he was cave diving with. Pretty early on in their trip, and I might not have all the facts exactly right because I certainly wasn't there, but this is sort of the way we understand it, is they're gearing up. They're at Ginny Springs, which is yes, there's some unexplored bits if you go way, way back, but it's a tourist cave. It's the Bunny Hill for cave divers. When I go cave diving, that's where I go diving. I have no illusions of laying line or connecting cave systems, or if it's just not something that I'm not down there. I'm not that proficient to ever get there. But like I said, he was diving the tourist cave. I just want to point that out. They're gearing up. They're working in the parking lot, getting the gear in the water and stuff. And Carlos had a tank with an oxygen label, the permanent label on it. And he was putting stage reg and stuff on it. And his buddy said something to the effect of, what's in that? And he said, oh, it's full of air. And some of these things don't make sense. I don't know why a diver would be diving air. At Ginny Springs, we dive nitrox. You dive nitrox, and pure O2 is your decompression gas. Typically, that's the template. They've been doing it for 40 years that way, and it works. So, but anyways, this is air. Well, the bottle says oxygen on it. Yeah, but I filled it at home. I filled it myself. I know it's full of air. This is one of those moments. That diver has the rest of his life to think about what he could have done different. But this is one of those moments where being a little bit more assertive would have been prudent. But Carlos had a personality that was very kind of overwhelming, or very he was the loudest voice in the room typically, and I'm a lot the same way. My grandfather had that, my dad had that, and I have that, where in grade 2, the loudest voice in the classroom was Greg's voice. I was always the one getting in trouble for whatever I said was heard. And I guess I still at this point make a point of being heard. So I can, and that kind of comes back to why probably Carlos and I's personalities. You got kind of two old miserable alphas in the same space, and there's just there was no room for that. So anyways, he kind of was adamant that this bottle is full of air, so he's going to dive that as a stage. He was very active on social media. He gets on his phone and posts something to the effect of, time to mix up a couple stages and push the devil back, or something. See if we can push back the devil. It was something along that lines. I remember that. So, the spring system at Ginny Springs is called the Devil's Ear. So, it's kind of cool sounding, but you're in a tourist cave doing a tourist dive, and that, everything with Carlos was always bigger. It was always an expedition. It wasn't just two guys or two people going diving for the fun of it. It was always, it was always played up as bigger and badder and more intense. And anyways, post that, probably again something that could be regretted is his kind of core dive instructor posted in the comment, "Go Rocket, boys!" Encouraging. And again, I'd be proud of my students, or proud of my people I've mentored, going out and doing their dives. But in the same breath, hey, be safe. Maybe would have been a better thing to say, but anyways, that was posted. So off they go on their dive. They jump in the water. They swim down the slough. They wiggle and crawl into Ginny. And for those that aren't familiar with the cave system, it's a relatively high flow cave. Beautiful, great viz, big tunnel for the most part. But the flow, certainly at certain times of year, especially, it rocks. So if you're not scootering, you're working really, really hard. When you get into the cave system, you get into about 65 feet of water. You work along the ceiling through a formation called the lips, which is you're basically using your fingernails almost to pull yourself through. And then further into the cave system, it starts to drop off and get to about 85, max depth until you get really into the back of it is about 85, 90 feet. You've got 3.5, 4 atmospheres on you. So Carlos and his buddy were able to work high workload. Like, you don't work any harder in a dive than you do swimming into Ginny. Get back about, I'm going to say 600 or 700 feet to a formation called the park bench. It looks like a park bench, so they call it that. And Carlos suffered a oxygen toxicity event, seized, and that was pretty much the end of Carlos. So his buddy worked the best he could to get him out. Actually, Rich Courtney, to my knowledge, was in the cave teaching a course, came upon this. So between the student, the buddy, and Rich, they got him out of the cave. They actually had some vitals when they got him out, but he passed away shortly thereafter. When they analyzed during the investigation, that stage bottle that was labeled oxygen, that Carlos was convinced was full of air, was found to be full of like 99.8% pure oxygen. So, he swam for 20-something minutes, extremely high workload in 3 to 3.5 atmospheres on pure oxygen. And that was the end of Carlos. So totally preventable. That was a ripple through the entire technical diving community that still reverberates a little bit. Jared Jablonski called my buddy Terry up and said, like, what the hell are you Canadians doing up here? Like, you don't know how to analyze your gas. People were so upset. There was certainly a lot of people sad about it, but there was outrage that such a fucking stupid accident could happen with all the resources that we have at our disposal and all the levels of training. That's kind of was the ripple, and it's still used kind of as a teaching point. He's used as a lecture point in technical diving courses again around the world. And sadly, Carlos really wanted to be somebody in the industry, and if he'd slowed down a little bit, he probably would have been, because he certainly had the resources and he had the personality to get there. But instead, now he's used as a teaching point in the industry, and goes a little further as some of his core group. When they got home or shortly thereafter, started sort of going through his estate and his dive gear and selling some stuff off. And in his shipping container in his fill station area, actually was an aluminum 80 with a permanent oxygen label on it. And when they analyzed that one, it had air in it. So Carlos wasn't wrong in that he thought he filled an aluminum 80 labeled oxygen with air. He was just wrong in that he had the wrong one and he didn't analyze. So again, we can analyze and we can Monday morning quarterback, and he should have analyzed that gas. We know that. His buddy should have been more assertive. We're going to come back to that a little bit, but ultimately a completely preventable death. But yeah, that sucks for Carlos. Carlos is dead. He's gone, right? What happens next? So you've got a business, a successful business, million or $1 million+ a year business that more or less vaporized, because without the captain, he was the captain of that ship or the leader of that business, it dissolved shortly thereafter. You've got a wife that's become accustomed to having, a family and accustomed to having an income. You have a life insurance policy that is not very interested in paying out on a technical diving accident. And then you have a daughter, 7 or 8 year old daughter that just lost her dad. Beside from that, you got my buddy Rich. So I talked about Rich being involved in the attempted rescue and recovery, and Rich was an incredible human being. He had the gift. He had the Gord Downie gift. The Canadians will know who Gord Downie was. He was a musician, and Gord was one of those guys, if you met him once, he'd remember your name for life. Like, I'm struggling. I got your name written down here. I know you're Nick, but I got it written on my notes so I don't forget. Gord would meet you and remember you, and Rich was the same way. I was down cave diving in like 2005 and met him briefly. And then in 2008, I'm back down cave diving, and we stop at his shop, and, hey, Greg, hey, Terry, hey, how's that light I sold you 2 years ago working? Just knows, how's the family, how's this? Rich had that gift, not without his issues. Rich had a very fragile sobriety. I don't really know his past, and we don't really care to ask people about their past, but you could tell just from knowing him when he had his shit together, he was a great guy. But, a strong gust of wind could push him off the wagon, and that's kind of what happened. So Rich was still at his shop, or I think they just closed his shop. He had a partner on it, but was a very active instructor, a lot of positive, great things going on, mentoring people in the sport. Had a daughter the same age as Carlos's daughter, who, again, was inseparable from her, great, almost best friends. Like I said, had a lot going for him. That day that Carlos passed away, Rich was involved in the recovery, and they'd give him CPR and all the trauma of that. And again, was very close with Carlos. So shortly after, like it was the day the accident happened, I got a phone call from Rich, and I was actually surprised. This guy very seldom calls me or whatever, but he told me what happened. And he was, at the time, he was not sober when he called me. And if I just pulled one of my best friends out of a cave, I'd imagine that I'd go on a little bit of a bend or two. So I'm not judging him on that. But, the time before this accident that I'd spoken to Rich was probably the last time I remember speaking to Rich while he was at any level of sobriety. So Rich, after the accident, continued teaching and continued in the dive industry, but he was on a downward spiral. He was really went down a pathway of mental health and addiction issues that he never recovered from. So about 3 or 4 years after Carlos's passing, I learned that Rich died on a bathroom floor from complications with his addictions. And now you have another orphaned daughter. Rich's daughter was his world, and she loved her dad like nobody else. I could sit back and say, well, maybe Rich's addiction issues were inevitable. In a lot of cases with people with mental health issues, it's almost an inevitability. But I really feel like that trauma, that event of Carlos's actions and Carlos's accident led Rich down a path. And it's really kind of sad, because I know Rich mostly from when he had his shit together. I actually didn't do very much cave diving during the period that Rich was dealing with his illness. So I don't really know him as, people call him Crackhead Rich. I don't know him as Crackhead Rich. I remember Rich, when he had his shop and all, the whole world going for him. It's sad because I go down there and I talk, mention his name every now and then. And a lot of people in the industry, down in Florida, down in cave country, will say, oh, fuck that guy, because they remember the worst of him. And it really is sad, because we don't remember the best of somebody. We remember our last memory of him. So there's the ripple. And the further out these ripples get, it's like a shock wave. It maybe has less intensity, but this is someone right tied into that accident. And it ultimately, I feel, led to his passing. It's really a dark and sad thing to say, but I want us to think about the consequences before we jump off the boat, jump into the cave. What are the consequences of my decisions here? Let's make good decisions. And we don't always make good decisions, but really sad that's happened.
You hit a lot of points there, kind of like at the beginning when you were saying that people move very fast through. It's easy once you finish that class. Okay, what's that next class? And there should be, I don't want to say gatekeeping or guardian, but it's like, okay, hey, go and get your experience and then come back for the next class, because there is a lot of money in this sport and people come in with a lot of money and they can just progress very fast. I actually know somebody personally who was able to just progress very fast to get to the point where they wanted to go. But at the end of the day, they didn't have a whole lot of experience. And I think that's a thing that people really overlook. Well, if obviously, but they'll overlook that experience part because it's like, okay, all the right and wrong things that should be done. But at the end of the day, like when you're actually in it, and you're not going to know things that come up until you're in the water and things are happening around you. Even, like every text in the world can prepare you for the moment, but until it punches you in the face, you're not going to know how to handle it, right? And until you have that built up experience. Also, the leadership role. I think there's been a few cases that's been talked about where, you kind of get this group around you, kind of bringing you up, telling you like, oh, okay, you're the shit, you're doing very well. And sometimes it does take that person to come in and be like, hey, just take a step back. And it's not always easy for people to do, for sure. It's probably one of the most difficult things when you're charging, you got this momentum of going. And then the ripple effects, like you said, it's never just the person. It's the family, it's the friends. I'll be honest, I didn't know the story. I might have heard wind of it from here to there, but just actually speaking to you about it and knowing like how it affected the direct people around him and then the ripple effect further. And then, like you were saying, he would have been known in the industry. Now he is, but just not for the right reasons, I guess. So, no, you're hitting a lot of good points. And I definitely feel that things like this need to be spoken about more because we are putting ourselves in situations. It is dangerous, right? And that's another thing too, is I'll be completely honest, like me coming from a very highly recreational background, just starting to move into the technical side of it. I know that in the recreational world, until you get to nitrox, it's really not pushed to analyze your gas. You're just kind of like, oh, okay, it's all air. You start moving into technical, it's like you really, really need to be aware of it and just more competent about analyzing, especially if you're, I feel it's a sad story for sure. Like it's just a sad thing to hear.
Something that's not talked about in the industry is there's no finish line. When you're an open water diver and you're doing your first checkout, like there's a starting line, right? And that's kind of it. But is an open water instructor, is that the finish line? Is advanced nitrox deco procedures, is that the finish? Is cave diver? Is trimix diver? Is rebreather diver? There is no finish line except for where you make it. So if you want to swim around on the Great Barrier Reef, go get an advanced card, do a couple specialties, work on some buoyancy control, do a fundamentals course. That's the best tool you could ever buy for diving. But no one ever says, hey, there's a good time to stop. You never stop getting better, but you don't have to keep pushing the range. Again, if you're comfortable doing some very basic cave dives, that's okay. I had that conversation with Terry as he was recovering from his liver transplant. We got some dives in Florida. It was December. He had a liver change, just like they're changing a car battery on the guy in June. And we're cave diving in December. And we come out doing a little scooter rip around Ginny, and it was pretty timid compared to some of the stuff we've done. And we come out, and I said, T-Man, if that's the best you can do for the rest of your life, that's all right. That's still pretty high level kick-ass diving. We don't need to push. So find where you're comfortable at and just cruise there for a while. And then maybe there's a reason to go beyond that, or maybe there isn't. I'm just happy doing what I'm doing. I just took myself off a trip because they're planning some really deep, aggressive stuff. I didn't get a good vibe from the trip operator. Felt like, again, just didn't get the right vibe. I said, there's something, I just don't feel good about this. And I'm not saying I can't dive to 400 feet, but I'm not diving to 400 feet, or not with them, not until, not doing it, not interested. So it was a free trip, man. It was paid for. And Alicia looked at me and said, what are you doing? Why are you even, go? And I just said, I just doesn't sit right. And I'm sure they're going to have a safe trip and everybody have a good time. I'm just taking myself off the bench on that one. But, you hit a few things, right? Is even a recreational level is there's this race to become an open water instructor. There's people that have gone from open water to teaching as an instructor in a year. And what are you teaching from? Because you don't have any experience. All you've done every time you've gotten in the water has been either teaching or taking a course. So what experience do you draw from to teach? And it's shameful. We need to slow down, but at the same time, the industry runs on money, and we need to be teaching and we need to be selling gear, or none of us get to eat. So it's a tough thing. I watched a thing the other day where Sig Hansen from Deadliest Catch was saying, never get greedy and never get desperate. And I've seen it in the dive industry. I've seen it with some charter operators where they've spent too much money. They need the boat to go and run, and they might make questionable decisions because they need that $1,000 today. They need that boat to run because they got to pay for an outboard or pay for whatever. And, one of the things I'm lucky with our charter business is it's not our primary source of income. So I can refund you your money and not take you to a wreck site, not lose any sleep about it. We do run into some tough stuff, but there's a line that we won't run to. And it's because I don't need the money. I certainly like the money, but I don't need it. And if you put yourself in a spot where you need to finish these checkout dives before November, or you're not going to get paid, or you need to run this charter, or you need to run this trip, you're desperate, right? And you might make financial decisions, not decisions based on safety. And again, Gareth can really dive into that stuff better than I can. But I brought an old light. I bought it from Rich the year that I did my cave course. It was a Salvo HID. And it was a real cool one because it's got the ballast is inside the canister. It was pretty cutting edge for the time. It's just a cool light. I still like HID stuff. The LED stuff's so durable, but the HID color just kind of has a little bit more punch than the LED stuff. And it was pretty tired, so I brought it into the shop that fixes those things and talked with the guy that fixes them. And he looks at it, he goes, "What are you doing, man? Why are we fixing this thing?" And I said, well, one, I like the color. And two, I bought it off my buddy Rich. And then that brought up the whole, wow, fuck that guy. And I had to cut him off. And I said, you remember the last days of Crackhead Rich. You don't remember Rich when he had his shop and a lot of positive things. And he kind of thought about it for a minute and then shut up and fixed my light for me. And I went out for Wednesday nights in cave country typically are when the locals go diving. And they all wait till after dark because they're all these rival factions. But it's really cool because the people you see diving together, you'd never expect in their professional life, you'd never expect to see these people diving together because so-and-so works at this company, which is arch rivals with this company. But on a Wednesday night after dark when no one sees you, I've seen GUE instructors diving side mount after dark at Ginny Springs on a Wednesday night. So, there is a disturbance in the force, and typically it happens Wednesday nights at Ginny. So we go out and do a dive. It's pretty, pretty just easy Wednesday night dive. We do an hour. Then you come out. Really, the reason we go there is because we want to sit at the tailgate of the truck and have a few beers. So, and that's when all of the world's problems really get solved. So I'm chatting with the guy, and he mentioned something. He said, he's been diving 15 years, at least longer than I have, been in the industry, been down in northern Florida that whole time, seen a lot of people come and go, a lot of businesses come and go, a lot of stuff, like just seeing it all happen, unfold before me. He says, he goes, I've got probably 20 or 30 contacts in my phone of guys and girls that are dead. And he says, I don't know what to do. I can't bring myself to delete the contact. And it sort of had me thinking, I'm like, I probably got a couple. And like, Nick, you're now a leader in this industry. Like it or not, people are going to be looking to you for some advice and some wisdom. And eventually, there's people that you've interviewed that likely won't be around. Bob and I did a Talkin Tek interview with Brett Hephill, and like 8 weeks later he was gone, and it like that one hit hard. No one saw that coming. So, that's a sobering thing, and the time in the sport is going to teach you those lessons the hard way. Again, you get to do 1,000 dives a year. It's not going to expose you to these stories that are going to kind of build your pre-dive plan, or influence you. So we had a couple other interesting ones. There's a guy up here diving in the Great Lakes. It's sort of trying to become an influencer. We see the story playing out again. He's really active on social media. And again, I love that. I love that people are presenting the sport, bringing it to the public. His core audience is the public, not divers. But again, moving really fast, being really aggressive, doing a lot of solo diving, doing a lot of deep diving, and just, I said, moving too fast. And there's a few people in the sport that have taken him aside. One of them, you've interviewed one or two of them, and said, hey man, pump the brakes. Love what you're doing, love it. But here's some key areas you need to get better at. And he's completely blown them off. I'm a pioneer, I'm an explorer, You're not Jacques Cousteau, dude. You're not a pioneer. You're a YouTuber, right? So, I made a point of calling him out, and these other characters that have tried to set him aside and have the fireside chat. So, we are improving as an industry. At least some people are trying to mitigate this or stop this. I'll do it publicly, right? If you're doing something stupid, I'm not afraid to call you out on it and say, hey, man, this is fucking dangerous. This is bad for the sport, because you're going to have an accident, and then it's going to be on CNN, and they're going to be going, our go-to dive expert has an accident. How could this have possibly happened? And a little bit has happened with Rob Stewart. Everybody's saying, how could this have possibly happened? He was such an experienced diver. And no one's really analyzed what level of a diver he really was or wasn't, because nobody wants to talk badly about a diver. But maybe he was a little in over his head. So, I've got myself in trouble for sort of calling what I see. And it certainly hasn't been the best for our business, but sometimes you got to make hard decisions and just do what your gut says. So it was a little over a year ago. We were up diving the Manitou. We keep a boat up in Wyerton. And when we were done our day of diving, Bob was up. Bob and I went out for lunch. It was actually June 18th, 2023, believe it or not. And we're sitting at the pub having some fish and chips and a beer. And I'm just talking about, I had a few experiences through the year that have sort of really stepped up my conservatism and made me look at the type of diving I'm doing, and more importantly, who I'm doing it with. And it's kind of harping on, man, we need to tighten up the teamwork. We need to make sure like the gas is getting analyzed. It's easy to say it. I'm not perfect, but the gas is getting analyzed. We're on the same run times. We're not, diving when the conditions are right or wrong. We just need to tighten it up. One thing we've caught ourselves doing and really tried to fix the last year or so is, Nick and I, we're doing a 200 footer, and we deco out, and my PO2 is a little higher than yours, so my deco clears before you do. You got 5 minutes left. Okay, well, I'll see you in 5 minutes, and I go up to the boat because I'm cold, or I got to pee, or I'm thirsty, or whatever. And it's like, you can tox, or you can have an event with your rebreather in the last 5 minutes in 20 feet of water as easily as you can in 200 feet of water. So leaving my buddy for the last 5 minutes really is unacceptable. And we've kind of caught ourselves doing that and said, okay, we don't do that anymore. We're going to leave as a team. We're going to come back as a team. And if you don't want to integrate into that unit, we're just not going to dive with you. There's obviously exceptions. If your suit's flooding and you're friggin' freezing and your deco's done, maybe then there's a little bit of it, but we really still need to have a plan to make sure that everybody comes back, because you take your eyes off of me and I take my eyes off of you, and who knows. Again, I could sit here on a tree stump and talk about all the things that I'm doing that's just better than everybody else, but I don't come from that place saying that I'm better than anybody else. I'm just saying this is what I'm seeing. And I guess the last one I want to hit on is Jared Hires passed away this past year. And I didn't really know Jared. I'd met him a few times. I think he's at DEMA. Really cool guy. A little bit I knew him, and there's some friends of mine that are a lot closer to him. Great diver, great instructor, and talk about a guy, he was going to carry the torch of the sport forward for the next 35 or 40 years. And he had an accident or had a medical issue in a cave that led to a seizure. And when this happened, again, it was like a bomb went off. The ripple effects were going on. The first stories coming out was a seizure in a dive. We instantly assume oxygen toxicity. Myself and a few others were kind of talking amongst ourselves, say, like, I don't buy auction toxicity. He was on, the machine he was diving was a good, reliable unit. They really don't fail. I'm not saying they can't, but their track record is they don't fail that way. And he's a good diver and he's paying attention to his machine. I said, I don't buy it. I don't buy that. So it was a couple weeks after the accident, his family had released some medical information that he'd developed or he had a seizure on land within a calendar year of his accident. And Alicia and I talked about that. She's like, well, why was he diving? Why didn't he stop? Why didn't he quit? And I just looked at her and I thought about it for a minute. I kind of pondered that question because it's the right answer is he should have just stopped diving. It's easy for us to say that. And I looked at her and I said, if I were diagnosed with a medical condition that should stop me from diving, would I stop diving? And she just looked at me, and she knows how stubborn I am, and she knows how important diving is to me. And she goes, no, you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't. So that tells the story. Jared's entire family's entire world was diving. It's really easy to say you should just stop, but it's really hard to do. It's an addiction. So I said it's hard to stop. That's what happened with him. So I go, that's how it applies to me. So again, I'm not perfect, and I ain't gonna stop no matter what. It's It is kind of what it is. So
I feel that many of those conversations were had as the information was coming out. Me and my girlfriend had that same conversation, like, why didn't he stop diving? And I basically kind of said the same thing. I'm like, well, man, this was his life. It was so much of him. To take that away from him, you're not going to be the same person. That's not the same person that she fell in love with. You're a completely different person. So it's very easy to say, yeah, he should have done this. But at the same time, when it's so part of your life, because I'm in the same boat. Like if they were like, hey, you can't dive anymore. I mean, I'd probably be like, okay, well, maybe I'm max depth 30 feet, max depth 40 feet. Like I'd still find a way to get in there, and his death definitely had a huge ripple effect. I'd never met him. Obviously I knew of him, of his family, they're like royalty of the scuba world. It was very, very sad to see. And it goes back to that ripple effect on how that's going to change the course of your future diving, thinking about that. And even kind of something you just said a little bit before, goes back to experience, right? You're like, oh, okay, it's very easy to say these things. When you're in class, when you're taking a course, they're putting you through all the bad scenarios. They're like, okay, you're in this not perfect, but you're in this learning environment and you're reading all the correct things and you're doing all the correct things. But then, like you said, it's like, oh, okay, you get a flooded dry suit and person's close to being hypothermic or something and they have to go, and then your buddy's left alone, and then it's like, oh, well, you're not supposed to leave your buddy alone, and it's, you have to plan for things, but at the same time, you can't plan for everything in the world. And those are the type of things that experience will help you with, right? And that's why I always go back to experience. I very much enjoy courses. You were saying earlier, you make it a point to take a class every year, and I've gotten a little crazy with it the past probably 2-3 years. Is I'm like, oh, I want to take this course, I want to take that course. And me, almost every time I'm sitting on the podcast speaking to someone, hearing about their experiences and things that they're doing, things that they're accomplishing, is kind of like adding to, I'm not saying it's real life experience, but it gives me something to think about, right? I'm like, oh, okay, that's something to think about. I never thought about it that way. It's very valid points. And it's weird because I remember when I took my first open water course, going into it, I had no idea what this diving world was about. And they kind of touch on the dangers of it a little bit, right? Enough to scare you, but not completely, obviously, scare you away from the sport forever. So it's one of those things where you're just kind of like, okay, I want to know more about it. And I feel like as you go into the technical world, they're kind of harping on it more, like, oh, okay, but I feel like it should be talked about more. Like, hey, if you're going to be taking these courses, if you're going to be going this route, like, you need to be sat down and told, and I'm sure it does happen, but it's a tough subject, and it's a hard one to navigate. I at times don't know how to navigate it, and I try my best and try to collect all the information, but at the end of the day, until it happens to you firsthand and you're a part of that ripple effect, and the closer you are to the center, the more it's probably going to have an impact on what you're doing in the future.
A few things that I've learned, again, probably the last 3 or 4 years, whether it's in my businesses or in diving, is trust your intuition. I don't claim to be psychic or whatever, but there's going to be subtle little things that we either pick up on or we don't. Whether it's, do I want to do business with this customer Do I want to sell a DPV to this person or not? Or do I want to do this dive or dive with this person? Trust your intuition. And, I was talking about having that fish and chips and a beer with Bob a year ago in June. And I said, I was just sort of harping on tightening it up. And I said, I remember saying specifically, I feel like something really bad is about to happen in this industry. And I just, if I can't stop it from happening, I just don't want it to be one of us. That was June 18th, 2023. And that was the day that the Ocean Gate accident had happened. That's not exactly in our industry, but again, that had some ripple effects. There were some close friends in the dive industry that were somewhat involved with Ocean Gate, either directly or indirectly. Again, you could feel something coming. You could feel that tension in the air. I don't know. That was just my intuition telling me something, and it was happening as Bob and I were drinking beer at a pub in Southampton, Ontario. So, I go, okay, so how do we move forward? Because I just pointed out, here's all the problems in the industry, right? First, I'm probably the biggest problem in the industry, but we got to talk about stuff. And, I've had a couple shitty dives, just even shore dives, and analyze them and, again, talk with Alicia because she's devil's advocate. She'll let me bitch at her only so long, and then she'll say, well, why didn't you do this? Well, because I'm perfect. Right? It was always my buddy. It's always someone else's fault. And I said, no, actually, you got a point there, right? So let's talk about the dive before we do it. I'm not really big on this GUE edge. It's got 11 E's in it, and we got to talk about what's in our pockets, and it's the same stuff that was in our pockets the last dive. But let's talk about what are the goals of the dive. Do these goals conflict with one another? Let's disagree on some stuff, right? If Nick and I are getting ready to get in the water and you're not comfortable with something, don't go along with it. Right? Greg, man, I don't like, tuck in your shirt, man. You look stupid. I don't know. I'm not getting in the water with you. You got a slob knob on. What are you doing? Right? I'm not diving with that. Disagree. And then we talk about it. We either compromise or we don't compromise, right? If it's that important, don't compromise. Greg, you didn't analyze your gas. I'm not diving with you. I'll go for a beer with you, but I'm not getting in the water with you. That's I'm hard on that. And disagree with me if you're uncomfortable. Now, I'm not perfect, but there needs to be a little bit more confrontation in the sport when it comes to this sort of stuff. And then debrief. The dive's done. Here's what you did good, Nick. Here's what made my dive really easy. And here's what you did that sucked. And here's what I did that sucked. And here's the stuff that I did good. And again, Alicia and I dive together terribly. We are so bad together in the water. We do not gel in the water at all. We're so bad. We hired James Mott for a weekend to do a couples diving intervention. And he was videoing us and our shitty teamwork and shitty buddy placement. Can I see my buddy? Yes. Can my buddy see me? No. We recognize there's a problem and we're working through it. But that debrief is such an important thing. It's saying, okay, you were, where you position yourself. Diving with a shitty buddy is exhausting because you spend the whole time like a dog with peanut butter on its back, trying to find your buddy, just looking around, and you're just burned out by the end of that dive. So am I being a good buddy? Am I putting myself in a position that my buddy can see? Is my light on? Even in really high ambient, I'll turn my light on because flash a light across your mask, you can get your attention, But again, coming back to, let's disagree more. I think that's probably the most important thing in training. I don't have a GUE flag tacked up in my garage, but I feel like, GUE, UTD training, some of the other, some of the human factor stuff, it's all really good. And more importantly than diving with someone that can swim backwards or do a helicopter turn or perfectly shoot an SMB is divers with the right mindset, right? Am I getting in the water? I'll get in the water with someone on side mount with a disaster of gear if they got their head on right. That's I think more important than anything else.
That's funny that you say that because actually me and Becca, we went and took a fundamentals course together just so we could be better teammates in the water. And going into it, I knew there was some skills that I lacked, obviously, going into fundamentals. You're like, okay, I'm here to work on team and skills and things like that. And I didn't realize certain things until you're actually watching the video of how bad of a teammate I actually was when I'm watching on the video, when you can see a couple of the divers here and then the other, and here I am just over here, not really a part of the team, just watching the team. And we were joking around throughout the whole course being yeah, this is basically couples therapy for me and Becca. We're learning how to be better divers in the water as well as working out through some of our problems. Gemma Thomas, she was our instructor. But no, and then I kind of wanted to, not to keep rehashing the subject, but I kind of wanted to go back on one thing that you were saying about the gentleman who was kind of moving too fast, and a couple people had spoken to him. I'm sure that's got to be hard when you have this momentum going for you, and then you also, nothing bad has happened to you, and then you have someone coming in being like, hey, slow it down, and then in your head you're like, well, why would I? Nothing bad has happened. I'm not defending that person by any means. It's got to be kind of hard sometimes, because we're all the movie star in our own movie in our head, right? We're all the main character. We're going through this world. Oh, nothing bad's happened to me. It's not going to happen until it does, and then it changes your mindset. So hopefully, he continues to move down and not have anything bad happen. I don't know how that all unfolded. So
yeah, it certainly ruffled some feathers, and again, publicly kind of outed him right in front of his parents. I know that was kind of an asshole move, but at the same time is, you know what? Maybe if mom sits you down at the kitchen table and says, that asshole at that dive show talking about how unsafe you are, is he just an asshole, or is there something to it? And a scuba instructor took me aside a few months later and said, man, it might be years before we know, but he says, you might have saved his life. And it did seem like last season he sort of slowed down. If I get the impression he's maybe kind of ramping things up a little bit again, but he's got another year of experience to draw from too. So we see this, Gareth does such a great job talking about aviation. They call it cockpit resource, right? If a flight crew can't disagree in a respectful manner, you've got a broken cockpit, and this is where the accident chain happens, right? You'll have a first officer that's adamant that the airplane isn't about to hit a mountain, and a co-pilot that is afraid to speak truth to the power, right? Because there is a power dynamic in that cockpit, and they'll just willfully fly an airplane right into the side of a mountain that one of the people in the airplane knew was about to happen. So we need to really work on a culture of safety and a culture of communication, and we need to be able to talk about this stuff and break it down, and like I said, disagree, compromise or not compromise. If the not compromise means that you don't go on this trip or I don't go on this trip, well, hey, at the end of the trip, everybody's alive. There's no orphan children. There's no addiction issues. There's no, all of the ripple effects are avoided. So it's still a successful thing. There's no shipwreck in the world. There's no cave in the world that's going anywhere. Every shipwreck's been on the bottom for at least 20-something years or centuries. Every cave system is tens of thousands of years old. It can wait for us to sort out our differences. And again, with limited exception, other than the few that are laying the line or finding virgin shipwrecks, there's really no urgency to this stuff. So what's the harm in it?
I guess that's the start, is just to start to have these conversations. And Gareth is doing a really amazing job. His word is getting out there. His program is getting out there. And I actually took a course with an instructor, and it's actually one of his requirements is, hey, if you want to come take a course with me, you need to do a human factors course. And I fully applauded that. And then actually when I see that, it almost makes me want to go towards that instructor more, because I'm like, okay, well, they're actually thinking about safety. It's not just getting rid of another card, signing another cert. It's like, okay, hey, they want you to take a step back, look at things a little bit differently, look at these situations that can happen, and that will move your diving forward. It may not be as fast as you want, but at the end of the day, like you said, at least we'll all come back alive. And even if you guys are bitching and moaning at each other, at least you're able to bitch and moan at each other after the fact and not just talk about what if. And that's actually the name of his short film, What If. To move it just a little bit forward, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about Subsea Propulsions.
I know you had Richard on, or Sid. We call him Sid. Seems like everybody gets a nickname in the dive industry, and if we got to come up with a nickname for Nick. But and it's one, if you don't like it, it's going to stick. So if you get a nickname and you don't like it, don't let anybody find out you don't like it, or it's yours forever. But Sid and I, it'll be almost 2 years ago now, we started negotiating with the former ownership at Submerge. They'd suffered some preventable tragedies and some kind of unrelated and related, I guess you could analyze. But anyways, they'd suffered some tragedies, and they were kind of in a position where they couldn't continue to operate the business. And it's too good of a brand, too good of a product to let just die. There's so many of these machines out there, and I spent a fair bit of time looking at what was out on the market, and there was nothing that checked all the boxes for Bender's or Greg's next scooter. And I'm going, well, what do I do? This is what I want, but they don't make it anymore. So we've been friends with them for decades, and we were able to negotiate a deal that was, interestingly enough, we weren't the highest bid, but partly because of the skills that Rich and I have and the relationship we have, they felt like the business would be in the best hands to move forward. We acquired the assets of the business Memorial Day weekend 2023, and shipped our first. We built a few pre-production scooters. We shipped our first scooter just after Labor Day 2023. We're building about 2 units a month, doing a ton of service and parts. Like, that's the bread and butter of the businesses. We got machines coming in from all around the world for refurbishment, service, and batteries and upgrades and stuff. We are developing a new machine that should, of course, what we're building is the best in the world. Everyone's going to say that. Should be the most efficient DPV on the market. We built the world's only, to our knowledge, DPV dyno. I've got a background in, I used to mess around in the early 2000s. I was on a NASCAR pit crew and traveled around Canada and a little bit in the U.S., working on race cars and changing tires and stuff. So I've got a background in competition engine building and fabrication. So try to sort of treat every scooter as if it's going to the Daytona 500. If you get a scooter from us, it's been run harder in our test cell than you'll ever run it. We take every machine, fully charge it, put it in the dyno tank, which measures its pulling force. We run it at full power for a certain duration, then we run it at a cruise speed for its entire battery length. So in the case of a Magnus, over 4 hours, and a Viper, 2.5. So they see a ton of abuse. We're trying to break it. If I break it here, I can fix it rather than I send it out, put it on an airplane and send it across the world, or put it on a truck and send it to Florida to find out there's a problem later. It's cheaper to fix it, cheaper, faster, and better for a reputation to break it here. So developing a few things, having a lot of fun with it. It, again, is not our primary source of income. I think there's certainly the potential that it could eclipse my other business. We've got a mechanic shop where we do automotive and marine work and a lot of fabrication stuff. And I see potentially in the next 3 or 4 years that Subsea could take a big bite out of what we're doing at the Fully Tech mechanical side. But we're having fun with it, building a very simple, reliable, bulletproof, tough machine. It may not have all the bells and whistles that some of our competitors have, but we look at a DPV like you would a rebreather. There's rebreathers on the market that have CO2 cells and backup solenoids and vibrators and all kinds of cool stuff, and RMS, which measures where your reaction is happening, and all that stuff is cool. And I love seeing that development. And I think when that state of the art machine comes out, you let it prove itself or not prove itself in the industry for 3 or 4 years, and then you'll start to see the other players adopt some of that technology or not adopt it because it simply didn't work. And we kind of take that same sort of step back and see what works in the industry and what you really need. Do you need a heads-up display? Do you need through-haul charging? Do you need these things? I don't. I'm not saying you don't, but I don't. A lot of our customers don't. I sort of compare if one of our competitors were a XCCR or a Liberty, we compare ourselves more to a Fathom. They both get the job done. They're both going to get you where you got to go. Ours does it with simple elegance, I guess. And we're pretty proud of what we're doing. Building them in Canada, global parts. Majority of our machine parts come out of a machine shop in Florida that does just about all of the dive industry's Delrin and plastic machining. So, a lot of things haven't changed. It's just subtle little improvements. We're having fun with it. I don't get as cranky fixing and building scooters as I do fixing a transmission on a truck. So for now, it's a lot of fun. So
I definitely wanted to ask, so Talkin Tek, what is in store for the future?
It is coming back. We started Talkin Tek, the whole Fully Tech, Talkin Tek, all that comes back to Terry Courts, and he's a really cool diver. He ended up in Canada for a couple of years with, his job placed him up in Canada, so we got to know him fairly well. He's doing some diving, or was doing some diving with the WKPP, so you're talking about like guy diving at a very high level, and for him to spend a little bit of time with us, mere mortals, was really kind of a cool thing. And he would always start with these jokes like, who do you think is more tech? Who's got a more tech side mount rig? Or, he coined the phrase about like slob winder knobs, and it really is just satire. We're making fun of ourselves more than we're making fun of you. So Becky and Corey from Light Monkey started during the pandemic, started a show called, I think it was Shallow Thoughts and Deep People or something, and we renamed it. We'd call it Shallow People and Deep Thoughts or something like that. And then, well, if Becky's got a show, we need a show. And it was more or less, it started on a whim of us just making fun of Becky. And then what ended up happening is we start having more viewers than her. And then we have her on the show. And it's like, again, we're all kind of in the core group at a high level in the sport. We're all taking our jabs, but we're all kind of friends in a lot of cases, or at least acquaintances. Again, the high, Jared Jablonski, Andrew Jiu-Jitsits, Becky Schott, they don't take themselves that seriously. They take their diving really seriously, and they stick to their protocols, but they're really humble people, and at a low level, we need to embrace that because that's the coolest thing about the sport. So, yeah, we're working on another season of Talkin Tek. We're going to try to bring it back in the fall. Bob's had a few challenges dealing with a sick family member, and that's really taken a lot of his attention away, but we're hoping he'll have a little bit of time to put towards Talkin Tek. I think we've extended the invite to Nick's agent is going to reach out to us, and we're negotiating that one. It's pretty tense, so he's a hard guy to book down for an hour. We've got a couple other guests we'd like to line up. We're working on lining up, and kind of the same stuff is sit down, have a beer, talk shit about each other, disagree on some stuff, show us what you're doing that's cool in the sport. It's been a lot of fun. Open a lot of doors, man. It's just so cool. You go to a dive show, or you just go to Ginny Springs and you bump into people and like, oh, you're that idiot from the TV show. And like, yeah, I'm one of the idiots from the TV show. So yeah, we're going to try to bring it back this fall. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Like I said, hope to have you on if your agent will allow it.
Definitely. I will put it in the calendar. It is a funny show. I do get a kick out of it. And the one part where it's just like the fuck off tells someone to fuck off or whatever. So
yeah, the fuck off Fridays. And it seems like by the end of the week, everybody's got somebody on their list, whether it's the phone company or another dive operator or like yesterday was Monday. And last week, we service everything at our shop, at our mechanic shop, and we used a lawnmower. We were testing a lawnmower, and we cut the neighbor's lawn. And the neighbor called yesterday bitching about us cutting his lawn. Like, we did you a favor, dude. Like, it's Monday. I don't even, I guess I can tell you to fuck off on a Monday too, but it's more fun on a Friday.
My last question, and you definitely have given a lot of advice throughout this whole episode, so I guess I'll just kind of sum it up. Somebody that is moving into higher risk diving, they're stepping out of that recreational realm and they want to start doing maybe some decompression. They want to start, doing multiple tanks. I mean, I know we've spoken a lot about the things that you should look towards, but I guess maybe in a mindset sort of way, what is the best piece of advice that you could give to somebody that is moving into a higher risk environment?
Well, obviously, like I said, something like a fundamentals course for whatever level of diving you're at is the best money you could spend, the best time you could spend. I think that works on mindset a little bit, and it also nails that foundation so that every skill you do in technical diving is easier if you have good buoyancy, propulsion, and trim. But probably the best advice for aspiring technical divers is find a mentor. There's a lot of douchebag mentors out there too. Find a good mentor, do some diving with them. The majority of the divers that are doing the big dives are also doing a lot of the lower level dives. It's like, yes, I am doing some deep diving. The majority of the diving I'm doing is in recreational limits. It might be in technical equipment, but that's just keeping sharp and building muscle memory so that when we do the bigger stuff, that foundation is very, very solid. But, you could latch on to a mentor just like I have. I latched on to Ken West in about 2005. He was an instructor, like a technical diving instructor candidate. So he was going out and doing a lot of dives in 40 and 50 feet of water just to nail down trim, just to nail out bottle rotation, just to nail down SMB stuff. So we're working on the skills. He's working on mastery, and I'm working on not getting sucked to the surface by an SMB. But we're diving together because he needs a buddy to go dive with. So you'll find it's not that hard to find somebody that's diving, a level or two up from you that wants to dive with you. And I guess the last piece of advice is you better go diving with them, because we find a lot of times we'll be working and mentoring, and you get to a point where we invite you 3 times. If you don't go one of those 3 times, we stop inviting you, because it's not worth us. It's not worth the keystrokes to invite you if you're never going to show up. So make a point, show up. You get invited by somebody that's doing cool dives, go dive with them.
Greg, I absolutely appreciate you coming on to the show. This has been super insightful. I definitely feel that there's a lot of good information that was spoken about. So thank you very, very much for joining. And I will gladly accept the invitation to Talkin Tek. I'll have to go grab a bottle so that I can crack one open and have a few drinks with you guys when you come back on air.
Well, thanks, Nick, for having me on. And dive safe, be safe. Everybody listening, same thing, be safe. And I hope people listening to the show look at that. Some people are probably going to think I'm an asshole, but there's a pretty good list of people that already know that. But hopefully it stimulates some dialogue, because we need to talk about this stuff. And I think we need to disagree more. There needs to be a little bit more conflict in the sport. I've said that, and I'll keep saying that, and I'll always continue to say that. I've done some other things in my life, in my career and stuff, and been gracious enough to work with a guy like Eric Cooper. He's an airline pilot now, but he was a charter captain and sort of influenced how we run our charter boats. And he's really huge on safety. And I want to say probably the last 3 or 4 years, safety's really been something that I've really harped on, and I'm probably going to continue on that. We were involved in, there was an accident in the Thousand Islands, a non-diving accident. It was a boating accident, and unfortunately an 11-year-old kid drowned. That was the same year the Manitou was found, so I got the call to be the first diver on the Manitou, and then Labor Day weekend I got the call to go do some search and recovery work, and I really didn't want to go do the search and recovery stuff. And again, Alicia kind of looked at me and said, you can't answer the call to go to the candy shop and not answer the call to go deal with the tragedy. And I think that was one of those influential times in my life where we did a lot of soul searching and look back on it. It's influenced the way we run our boats. I'm that old miserable fucker standing at the end of the dock yelling at kids that aren't wearing their life jackets when they're out in a canoe, because I've seen the consequences of it. So I said, when we run our boats, we get out of the truck, we got the self-inflate PFDs, we put them on. We're walking around a boat, a diver's. One of the stupidest things we do as divers on boats, and it's really common in the Great Lakes, is it's hot. So we get out of the water, we unzip our dry suit, we pull it half down, we get the suspenders holding up, and we're walking around the boat during our surface interval in a dry suit that's half on. And if you go in the water, I'm not saying don't do that, but be aware of how dangerous that is. If you go in the water half in a dry suit, you're in a lot of trouble. You're in a lot of trouble, and you're in a lot of trouble really fast. So if you're half in a dry suit and you put on a PFD to go do whatever you were going to do and you fall in, well, now you're just wet. So, it's stuff like that. Eric Cooper pointed that one out to me a couple of years ago, and it was like a light bulb. I've been doing this myself for 20 years. What the hell are you doing, Greg? What are you doing? That's really stupid. Stop it. Clean it up. That's been my thing in the last 3 or 4 years, and I think it probably be my thing till I step back out of the sport. And I think there needs to be more of it. And I said, let's talk about it. Let's disagree.
Off-gassing, a scuba podcast.